Hi, today we're going to look at how to set up and configure a SQL Server Profiler trace. SQL Server Profiler is a very powerful tool available within the database engine, and it's basically used to go ahead and understand what's happening in the server during query execution, or basically just to understand what's going on in the server at any given point in time. Profiler is basically collecting most of its information using the underlying extended events, and therefore it's actually very powerful and captures a wide variety of data that is not usually otherwise available. Profiler is a little resource intensive, so it's not generally used or preferred as the best way of capturing information on a server, but every novice DBA or even an expert DBA actually should be available or should be familiar with how to use SQL Server Profiler. More traditional approaches to collecting this information would involve setting up a server-side trace. However, the first step is always to go ahead and understand how Profiler works and what kind of information you can capture using Profiler. So as you can see, I'm going to go ahead and use SQL Server 2012 as the preferred management studio option, or basically Visual Studio shell that I want to use to identify Profiler or work with Profiler today. And the idea is to go ahead and just click Tools and then select SQL Server Profiler, at which point you would actually get a screen that looks like this. Now in the screen, as you can see, I've got a new trace template that I can use, so I'm just going to go ahead and connect to the existing SQL Server 2012 instance that I have available. And once I'm done with that, I should be seeing this screen here, which is asking me to go ahead and configure the trace itself. So I'm going to give this trace a name, trace1. And some of the useful stuff in Profiler is that, as you can see, we've got templates, ready-made templates available for common scenarios that you would be expected to go ahead and investigate. For example, some of the most common ones I use is T-SQL duration, T-SQL locks, and tuning. We'll go ahead and explore some of these templates in later videos, but for the moment, just as an introduction to SQL Server Profiler, we're going to stick with the standard. The next option that you have here is to go ahead and save the Profiler information or the data that's being captured as a file or into a table inside one of the databases. The third option is to not do either of these and simply view the information as it is being collected. In this case, Profiler would list the data on the screen by splitting the existing screen that you see in the background here into two halves. The first one showing you what's going on, and if you click on a particular row, you should be able to see the details. We'll go ahead and look at both of these things in a minute. The next thing that you want to look at is the enable trace stop time. Now the intention here with this particular option is to go ahead and allow you to automatically disable or stop the trace after a specific amount of time. This is especially important because, like I mentioned earlier, the Profiler trace is actually quite resource intensive, and therefore it's not a good idea to just have it running continuously on the system. Very often novice DBAs would often forget that they've got a trace running, and the trace in itself, especially if you've got one of these options selected, would then consume a lot of resources and disk space, causing the system to run out. So it's always a good idea to estimate how long you want the trace to run and then specify some time over here just to be a kind of a backup in case you're not available, or just in case you forget. The next thing that you want to look at is the event selection. So as you can see on the top here, we've got a couple of events listed here. Now as far as Profiler is concerned, you'll see that for the most part you've got events, which is the rows that you see here, and then you got the actual values that are being captured. The idea here is that a combination of these two is approximately 2000 different data points that can be captured, and that's a whole lot of information that's being captured on a millisecond by millisecond basis. So you want to go ahead and make sure that you're choosing very specific events and very specific columns so that you don't try to go ahead and fetch a very large amount of data. The intention here is that if you're more specific about what you're looking for, then you'll get more accurate results, and you'll eliminate a lot of the noise that would get captured otherwise. Again, Profiler is, like I mentioned earlier, very powerful, and therefore captures a lot of information, and it's easy to get lost in terms of how much information you have here, and it's always a better idea to filter or customize the template to suit very specific requirements. Say for example, in this particular template that I have here, I've got a lot of information in terms of the audit of logging, logout, existing session information, as well as store procedure and T-SQL commands or ad hoc SQL. However, if you look at it, I don't really have an option to select for a specific database. Now, assuming I've got maybe 100 databases on this particular instance, Profiler is not going to go ahead and isolate individual databases for me, and therefore it could be difficult for me to keep track of what's happening in which database. So I'm going to go ahead and add a column for database name. So as you can see here, by just selecting the checkbox, I've enabled the trace to go ahead and collect the information about database name. And also, once that's done, I want to filter the information for a very specific database. So if you look here, when I click column filters, I get this particular window here. And in the window, you can see that the options listed on the left hand side is pretty much the columns listed over here. And for that purpose, I'm going to go ahead and select database name. And I have a database called ABCD, so I'm going to go ahead and select that, press OK. And now what's going to happen is Profiler is going to select or very specifically filter the information coming in that's only pertinent or relevant for database name ABCD. With this, I can make sure that Profiler is not going to collect information for all databases on the server, but very specifically just the one for ABCD. So let's go ahead and run the trace now. And as you can see, not much happening because at this moment I don't really have the trace up and running. So let me go ahead and execute some code on the database, and then let's see what happens or what information is captured in Profiler. So the first thing I want to do is let me just go ahead and connect to ABCD. After which I'm going to select some data out of one of the tables here. And I think this one's empty, so that shouldn't really matter. But as you can see here, if I pause the trace right now, you'll see that I've got the exact SQL that I've just executed, which is select star from HR employee info. And well, there was not really much there in that table, so as you can see, it's 0, 46 reads, and the total duration is 98 milliseconds. And you got the execution time here. So this is how you want to use Profiler to isolate or exactly understand what's going on. Also, you might see a lot of additional information as can be seen here. So this is again internal processes that are going on to identify column level information and database schema, things like that. So with this, you can see how powerful Profiler is, and you can see that there's a lot of things going on here in addition to me just going ahead and executing the select statement over here. So this is how you want to use Profiler to understand what's going on the system and then be able to troubleshoot or investigate further. If you want to go ahead and stop Profiler, you just need to go ahead and press the stop button up here, and that'll go ahead and stop the trace, assuming that you've gone ahead and maybe forgotten or ignored certain scenarios and you want to start the trace from scratch. Again, you can simply pause or stop the trace and then press the clear button here and then start the trace again, at which point it erases all the data and then starts from scratch. You can use this particular button to go ahead and search for text within the trace. So you got all the columns listed here. And that's pretty much it as far as the Profiler trace introduction is concerned. I'll be showing a couple of more other videos on how to use Profiler in slightly more advanced scenarios later on. This is Jayant, and I hope you've enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.